So another new game for the channel, and it's a new game in general. It's just hit the early access road on Steam. It's a first-person spaceship salvage em-up, so let's ask, Hardspace Shipbreaker, is it worth playing? So I've always liked the homeworld games, not just as someone who found themselves as an RTS fan when the first game launched, but also the world and the art style those games really invest in. As you've noticed from the title, this isn't a directly overt new game from that world, but with some of the key former homeworld devs working and indeed running Blackbird Interactive, the developers of Hardspace Shipbreaker, it's clear that although this game has a completely different gameplay to its RTS forebears, it certainly shares some of that same spirit. And just before we really start, I want to say in my normal full disclosure way that the publishers, Focus Home Interactive, gave me access to the game via Steam for the purposes of making videos, just like this one. The game starts with a beautifully done, and again very homeworldy, intro cinematic to set up the tone for the world. Child's voice speaking the lyrics to an imagined song about the treacherous work that being a shipbreaker, or cutter, actually is. It's all over some superb sci-fi images of a ship making its way from the planet up to the dangerous world in orbit. There's even a sequence when you sign up for the job which continues to stress the all-powerful, oppressive, coercive tone of the world and your relationship with this faceless corporation. You find yourself in huge debt, not just in a Tom Nook fashion, but actually to the tune of $1 billion to the Lynx Corporation, your employer, as you work as a shipbreaker. To pay back that money, and additional costs such as things like equipment hire, you must work at breaking up and salvaging ships. The most effective way to do those is to complete work orders, but you want to make the best use of your time you have in your shift to make as much money as possible, so if you can salvage something easily, then you probably want to do so. The actual gameplay is really quite refreshing. It feels genuinely innovative to tie together a zero-G world with what looks from a high level like it's almost like a puzzle-solving game. But don't think of it as slow or boring though. You're kept on your feet as things like a 50-minute shift timer, oxygen levels, tool commodities are always a concern. But while you're thinking about whether you have enough air to breathe, also don't forget to really analyze what you're doing with that laser or that grapple as you take apart the ship. Pressurized internals, fuel, cooling, and even reactors all combine to produce a thoroughly hazardous working environment. This complexity does give an intricate feeling to the actual ships as well. Their designs, at least at this stage of early access, don't get extremely complex in sort of visual fidelity, but that all seems in keeping with the whole design aesthetic of the world. As you move around inside these ships, there's an almost archaeological feeling as you can see and learn how they were used in their working life. Some focused on cargo, others seem to have worked more as passenger vehicles, but now their interiors are your domain. Pick from the assets you see floating, as well as carving up the carcass of their main structure. Sometimes there are floating hard drives that can be retrieved to find information about the ship's previous occupants. I had one moment when I was floating in the darkness and I had someone's poem of adoration to a loved one was being read out, but like I was trespassing not just on their communications but their ship as well. These hard drives are a good way to add a bit more depth to the world and to fill in that human side, and of course completely optional, people who aren't interested in the lore side. And just a quick aside to say, if you do like this video, please do tap the thumb up button, helps me out with YouTube and discoverability and all stuff like that. Also, if you click the subscribe button as well, then thanks, it is all really truly appreciated. And the facet that I liked about the gameplay was the progression that you felt by learning to do the job better, rather than it just being about unlocks, of which there are a number of options as well. I'm much more efficient and speedy in the way I now tackle a ship than I did all those hours ago when I first tried the game. I know how, say, heavy panels need to be prized from their homes so that the tethers that can bunging the materials into the furnace or processor or lower barge can do so with ease. I know common points for laserable joints to free the different sections. I know how to pop off the lower panel from a reactor to whisk that thing away before it melts down is a top priority, not just for safety, but also my wallet. Those things are worth a pretty penny. All these little experience and learning moments combine to give a nice sense of accomplishment, actually getting better at this skilled task. The music is a key component for the game as well. It's very well judged. Just enough of that almost sort of frontier spirit. You're on the very edge of a planet's influence. You're employed in a dangerous task. It has touchstones to other sort of historical times when people risked their lives in pursuit of betterment for themselves and for their families. Soundtrack is a functional device in the gameplay too. Quiet moments are sometimes punctuated with increased volume and heavy breathing as urgent tasks like refilling oxygen need to be undertaken. Also, musical cues for particularly dangerous tasks like reactor removal help give moments a climactic feel as it helps tensions rise. This being a game in early access, all the content isn't in the game at the moment, so there aren't that many different classes of ship to work with, though what we seem to have seen from game trailers and what's talked in their plans, I'd hope to see a number of more options in the future. That's not to say that every ship you work on from the same class is identical though. They seem to have a procedural system for filling the finer details like seat and cargo position, along with larger differences like, say, cargo transport or passenger versions. There's also a section in a recent Steam news post under additional features planned for full release. It's a bullet point for user-generated content. I very much hope this might mean the release of assets for people to make ships themselves. I have my fingers crossed. This is of course a game in flux, in active development, so there are some points that I'd like to touch on about the general experience of playing at the moment. There are currently 2 ways to play the game, a sort of sandbox mode with no progression but you can practice in, and a career mode to work through its various layers. I found that I spent most of my time in the career mode as that gave the game more meaning. There were meaningful goals, unlocks, and so on. For a semi-puzzle game with a fairly relaxed moment-to-moment gameplay, the presence of a number of timers meant that you always felt under pressure to keep moving as fast as possible. Your shift timer is 15 minutes, which absolutely breezes past. Can you complete the work order in that time, or will it take another day? Will I make back those additional costs that I incur from taking that additional day? It's a number of things to consider, and of course you're considering these all under a timer. And that's before you notice that your oxygen is running low and you need to leave the job and have to go and pay to fill it back up again. The same with thruster fuel, equipment wear, and so on. It feels like there are a lot of layers of timers counting down at all times. It feels like some of these could be tweaked a little bit to be less of a motivator, especially at the start of the game. It's tough to take on new information when there's a clock literally ticking down in your eye line. There's a focus on making as much money as possible from a shift. You need to earn at least as much as you're going to be charged in ongoing costs, such as equipment hire, to make a dent in that slightly concerning billion-dollar debt. However, the only time you're really given the information about the worth of these things that you're actually doing is when the shift ends and a receipt for that work is presented to you. You then have to try and correlate the things that you did with those items on that list and learn which are the best uses for your time. It's not massively intuitive to learn those values. Perhaps an option to see a dollar value for the objects you're actually processing during your shift would be a better solution. Pop some panel into the furnace and hey, it's a couple of bucks. But fire some complex item into the barge below and it's worth thousands? Well, I know what I'm focusing on in the future. We should talk about performance as well. Initially I'd say it felt okay, that is above 60 FPS on my old 970 GPU with i7 processor, but that's when there aren't what you might call physics events, I guess. That is the sort of systemic side of the game where the logic needs to calculate what's happening. So if you decompress an area, even in a safe way, the performance seems to dip a bit, though not to an unplayable level. If things go a bit sideways and something unplanned happens, and it will, we've all yanked the wrong panel off the side of a compressed section before, and the performance can suffer in the resultant melee. For a small side of a ship looks like it popped like a champagne bottle, that stuff's not too bad. But wholesale, wow, I just nudged the reactor, which will explode, which will ignite the fuel as well, and the shattering and the fury that creates can cause frame rates to drop pretty low as the CPU seemingly tries to recreate the calculations for the explosion the size of the Big Bang. Yeah, oops. But once things stabilize, the FPS recovers a good bit, and it's impressive to see a procedural approach to panel and structural fragmentation and destruction in this game. Plus, as I've said, this is an early access title, so I'm guessing that none of the systems that will allow the creation of this mayhem are finalized either. I'd hope and expect to see performance improvements as it travels along the early access road. It's difficult not to see the promise that this game has. There's a limit to the content that you might expect from an initial title launching in early access, yet the devs estimate that there's around 15 hours of gameplay currently included. The core of what's here is thoroughly enjoyable, and it's easy to imagine it scaling up into bigger and more complex, exciting things. I hope that they continue to add more tools for the players to use as well, not just expand the number of occasions that the players use the ones that they have now. The equipment unlocks in the career mode feel like they scale down more than they sort of scale widthways. That is, it feels like improvements to the tools you already have, more range, more power, and so on, rather than here's a new tool that works in a completely different way, do you want to use it? The recent news post lists that the content we have now represents Act 1, let's get to work, with Acts 2 and 3 coming later, and totaling 40 hours of gameplay to the campaign side, so I'm excited to see where the devs are going to take this journey. One area I hope they focus on, and one static part of the experience currently, is the location you actually work in. So if they could make a ship with the same 3 salvage locations, and then create a skybox with stars, then you could have a different mission type with backstories like, hey, this ship is broken, please go out and find the precious cargo, and the rest of the vessel is yours. I'm going to rather presumptively say that with the gameplay we have at the moment, if they can replicate that for a new ship art, and replace the space station that you're normally located in, then with a different skybox, it would massively change the feel of the missions and improve replayability of the game by a huge amount. It feels doable in a shorter time frame in comparison, like asking for multiplayer or something like that. And yeah, okay, multiplayer would be amazing, yet that does sound like a massive amount of work to include. I'm not even a programmer, but syncing up all the physics behind all the parts that explode sounds like a massive headache and a huge undertaking. So, is it worth playing? This is an early access title with what we hope is a bunch of extra content coming in the future, but my position on pre-release games these days is that players should probably buy them based off the content they have now, not purely on the promise of something happening in the future. This isn't a Kickstarter project. To that end, the current price of the game is £21.99 in the UK, but there is a 20% discount that lasts until the 7th of July 2020, so it's not priced like a AAA title, but there is a bunch of content here, a max of around 15 hours to the campaign, and then however long you want to spend in the sandbox mode. The core gameplay is a lot of fun, a genuinely different take on a sci-fi space game, and I think there is room to tweak some of the timers to preserve some of that methodical calm that the sandbox mode allows you to experience. Early access also means things like limited graphical settings or full performance optimization, so if you are on an older system like me, things might not always maintain the 60 FPS you might be after. But again, this isn't a Twitch shooter, so the frame rate dips don't really dominate the experience in the same way. If you do want to decide whether or not this game is for you, then keep in mind that it is available on Steam, so the normal rules apply. Just play for under 2 hours or own it for less than 2 weeks, and you can get an automated refund if you so desire. So, what do you think of Hardspace Shipbreaker? Have you heard of it before, or does it look like something you'd try? Leave me all your powerful thoughts and feelings by leaving a comment below right now. As always, I'll be reading every single one of them. If you enjoyed this video, please do tap the sub button, ring that notification bell so you know when the next video is up. To all the people who tweet, retweet, post my videos to Facebook or Reddit or wherever, I see you, I appreciate you, thank you so very much. And thank you so much for watching this video. I will see you next time. Take care.